Garen J from GitHub. He's going to talk about how GitHub uses GitHub to build GitHub to further expound GitHub.
Yes, yes. Woo, woo, woo. I've said this a few times already. I think it's a cruel trick to put introverts on stage, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes for this talk. Hey, how's it going? My name is Garen J. I work at GitHub. In case you don't know, GitHub is an online code sharing collaboration platform for engineers and designers. Maybe your company uses it. If not, maybe they should. And today's talk is going to be about how we use GitHub to document GitHub at GitHub. So the title's a bit vague. So to make it more clear, this is going to be a talk about workflow. So to be even more precise, it's going to be a talk about our workflow, which happens to be GitHub. Our whole foundation for writing and delivering documentation at GitHub has been a process that we're constantly tweaking. So our workflow is always evolving. The stuff I'm going to talk about on these slides were the result of making many mistakes. And this talk is going to be slightly opinionated because I have opinions. And one of my main motivations for giving this talk is that I don't think there are enough discussions about documentation workflows, documentation tools, documentation processes. And I want to hear more about those. I want to hear more about what people love about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So in that spirit, this is our little contribution. And you know, the fact that I happen to work at GitHub is completely irrelevant for the purposes of this talk. If you use Perforce, a CMS, anything else, like my hope is that you'll be able to leverage some of the ideas in this talk to your, thought leaders and decision makers at your company. So the problem is that too often delivering quality code and delivering quality docs are two completely separate processes. And when GitHub was first designed, it was intended to support engineers and open source projects, and a lot of the tooling built around it deals with shipping code, not with content. So the docs team at GitHub strove to follow patterns that the company at large was using. And yeah, we basically piggybacked on a lot of their ideas and their tooling. Above all else, everything I'm going to talk about, everything at documentation related at GitHub uses open source tooling, as well as tooling built with our public API. So nothing I'm going to say is like secret sauce, like the sauce is out there and here's the recipe. So first, some real quick information about why you should listen to anything I say. I joined GitHub as the first tech writer in 2013. Before that, I worked on tooling for DITA, I wrote plugins for text editors, I dabbled in FrameMaker, I did all that XML stuff. The three other disembodied heads represent the rest of the team. We support about 115 engineers, support staff, and salespeople. And it just so happens that our entire team is also remote. And that pretty much has a direct effect on the way we communicate and collaborate. It's all over the net. Another stat I usually like to toss out is that help.github.com is our second most visited website, right after github.com. So our writer to engineer ratio is like 1 to 30. There's an enormous visibility on our documentation, and we basically had to come up with our own workflow that was both efficient and accurate. Our typical cycle probably matches what everyone else in this room does. You write something, you get it reviewed, you build it, you publish it. And the unique part is how we leverage GitHub for all of this. So we'll start at the first part, which is the writing, obviously. Something we really value at GitHub is to write simply. So writing simply is the idea of using like the 5-cent word over the $1 word, preferring short sentences over longer ones. Don't nest bullet points. Don't try to cram more than one idea on a page. GitHub, the product, is intended for a fairly technical audience, but we strive to speak like humans. So this leads directly into our next tenet, which is to simply write. A few of us come from backgrounds where XML is the standard for documentation. If you take a look at most documentation tools, they're either too complicated to understand or they're too simple to use. And at GitHub, we found the need to kind of strike the balance between those two to support content reuse and use a syntax that won't frustrate the writers. So with simplicity as a goal, we use Markdown for all of our writing. This is not obviously an actual piece of content from GitHub. But to illustrate the point, like on the left here is kind of, I can use my shadow as a pointer. On the left here is like a traditional XML kind of based writing setup that most big codes in the world have used. And on the right is the same set of instructions in Markdown. Only one of these is really easier for a human to read, write, and review. You can see on the left that it's like you have to remember to put the command tag within the step tag, within the steps tag. And in Markdown, it's basically exactly what you would expect it to be. You type the number 1 and it becomes a numbered list. Like the output of both of these are the exact same. So admittedly, when we started doing it in Markdown, we found that the structure's a bit loose and it kind of allows for a lot of variance, which I will talk about later in the slide. But mostly with a simpler writing structure, all of the kind of effort to have accuracy shifts onto the review process. And in order to facilitate our reviews, we use pretty much pull requests on GitHub exclusively. Maybe you're not using GitHub, so I'll do a super quick intro on what a pull request is. Pull request is basically a way to introduce a change. In this example, Sherry wants to make some changes to the docs. So she edits some files. She opens a pull request so that everyone on the team can see the changes. She'll write up a little comment describing what she's changing. Others inside and outside the team can comment on those changes. And when she's ready, she merges the pull request, and ta-da, documentation is born. So if you've done a PR before, you might think that this is actually the most important part of a pull request. But it's actually this part, the part where you can provide comments. Pull requests are discussions, right? The changes within the pull request are important, but the real power in a PR comes from talking about those changes. If you're using Perforce or World Server or some other CMS, making a change is one thing, but being able to discuss why those changes were made is what's more powerful. With pull requests, the discussion and the change take place at the same time. You don't need to link the two together. There's never any question about why a change was made. This holds true for changing code, and it holds true for changing content. We're super keen at GitHub on being as transparent as possible, both internally and externally. We try to discuss as much as possible out in the open, and we keep our decisions public for everyone in the company. We shy away from using email and other back-channel modes of communication and prefer to take our decisions in a pull request. Right, so like email is a terrible place from whence nothing escapes. And there are a few key ways in which discussions in pull requests are more valuable for our team. So first, it serves as a public forum for demonstrating to everyone inside and outside the team how we communicate and how we arrive at our decisions. We don't need to teach anyone else in the company how we write. After enough lurking and observing our ways, people outside of the team jump in and correct the content. Most typically, these are people in support or training or others who are regularly talking to users. So we gain tiny contributions without making any effort to do so. In this example, like Michael knew that we don't call the product Enterprise, we call it GitHub Enterprise. He made the change himself, and those sort of micro updates free the rest of the team up to address larger structural issues while still enabling others in the company to participate. Sorry. So with a discussion that's out in the open, there's also no confusion as to why a certain feature was documented a certain way. You can link back to any comment in a PR. It's not at all uncommon to have a discussion and link back to some previous comment that occurred months ago. Instead of pondering why a certain style was adopted, we can all see the comment where a decision was being made. Every pull request is also a linkable URL. A URL is something that lasts forever. The newest hire to your company probably won't have access to your old team emails, so any previous discussions will be completely lost on them. I can go back through years of doc changes and style decisions with the pull requests. You can compare this approach to something like Google Docs. So like Google Docs also have a URL, but the comments that you make on that doc disappear with time. Like you make the edit, you resolve that edit, and you're done. Like it's incredibly handy to be able to cite these past conversations as we go forward. And then the other thing you can do in a PR is you can directly ping people. So you're probably familiar with the @mention syntax. Twitter and Facebook use it. If you @mention a GitHub user, it'll send them a notification via the email or through the web. And we're tending to use the individual @mentions less and less, so a much more powerful evolution of that is @mentioning teams. So a team is exactly what you would expect it to be. It's a group of individuals interested in a topic. So we have teams for the docs group as a whole. We have sub-teams for the enterprise docs and our platform documentation. Zooming out, we have teams for our security groups, our legal group, our designers. Everyone is on a team of some kind. So when a feature is in the process of being written up, we tend to ping the teams that are involved in the feature for an additional review. This allows us to expand the scope of our review beyond just the documentation team and gets the people building the feature directly involved. And ideally, when a feature is in the process of shipping, we'll often get pinged by the engineers, or at least that's the goal anyway. But like the absolute best part about pull requests is this little button. Never underestimate the power of unsubscribing. So most of us creep around on various engineering teams in order to keep abreast of what's going on. Usually other teams will initiate a discussion that really doesn't have a bearing on documentation. It's incredibly useful to know what's being worked on, but if it's not relevant for us, then we just unsubscribe ourselves. You can't really do that in an email. The problem with email is that it just continues to grow and grow like a snowball rolling down a mountain. We're a pretty small team. We trust each other. If a feature is being picked up by someone else on the team, the rest of us usually bow out and just find something else to work on. Okay, so it's taken me a while to get to my favorite part of the workflow. I could do a whole talk on just documentation build tooling, but I'll keep it simple. So every website in the world, right, like whether the largest social network to the tiniest startup is just composed of HTML pages. That's it. And the whole point of HTML is to take something that's written by humans and turn it into something that's readable by a computer. So much like we keep our writing simple, we prefer to keep our build process simple too. There are a bunch of complicated techniques on the internet that are used to assemble web pages, but I've yet to be convinced that any of these techniques are relevant for documentation. As an example, here's a listing of every single output format that the DITA Open Toolkit is capable of producing. That's 10 different output formats generated by one XML markup. And in almost 9 years of technical writing, I've only ever needed 2 formats. What happened with DITA, I think, is what happens to other software projects. Someone comes up to you and says, hey, HTML output is great, but what I really need is my output in Word, or I really need my output in Trough, or what I need is this new format for this very specific use case. And it's not just DITA, though. I mean, if you look at Sphinx, for example, they'll do LaTeX or EPUB output, even if you don't need it. It's a problem when your tool supports 10 different formats and you really only care about 2 of them. Nothing can do 10 things well except maybe a Swiss Army knife. So, to put it another way, just do one thing, do it well, that's it. So when we talk about documentation, what's the one thing you want to do as an author? You want to write. What's the one thing you want your build to do? You don't want it to fight with 10 different output formats. You don't want a team dedicated to figuring all that out. You just want to build your content. So with that in mind, we use a build tool called Jekyll to create our web pages. It basically takes the Markdown documents that we write and it turns them into HTML. That's it. Doesn't do anything fancier. Jekyll is cool in that it's an open source project that we contribute to, but we don't necessarily maintain. With Jekyll, we get a lot of features built for us, like really, adult documentation features. We get content reuse. We have a huge community of users. We have plugins. We have live reloading, and it just so happens to easily integrate into GitHub. And as a side note, like Jekyll is not by far the only tool that exists in the world that supports these. Like there are literally dozens and dozens of them. We just happened to pick this one. As a super quick example of kind of more complicated things we're doing. We build our documentation for 2 separate outputs. There's GitHub.com, the website, and GitHub Enterprise, which is like an on-premise version of GitHub. Features available in one doc set aren't available in another, and when we're writing, we have to keep multiple outputs in mind. In order to support writing content for these 2 products, we basically use versioning blocks like the one shown here. This chunk of text only shows up when we're building for the .com output. To do this same thing in XML, you'd probably need to add some kind of attribute to your section tag to exclude it. You'd probably need to update an XSLT somewhere. I don't know. Keeping the versioning in line with a text file like this also makes it much easier to review and verify the content if you're the human that's actually looking at the PR. Since Jekyll is so popular, it's really easy to set up on any machine. Keeping your build tools simple at GitHub means that anyone in the company can build documentation. It lowers the barrier for other types of contributions. So remember earlier when I mentioned the support guy who basically opened a pull request to change some text. Just last week we had a designer who noticed something was off with the CSS and the banner. He made a visual change locally, he verified it with a build, he opened the pull request, and that was it. Like, instead of learning a brand new workflow, he was able to just do the work that he wanted to do and not wait for output to happen. So this is the other interesting thing. With this kind of model of like anyone can open a pull request and Markdown is super loosey-goosey, one other advantage of having a quick build gives is the ability to test our content. So we have like a super exhaustive test suite that we run on every change that's made. We test for broken links, we test for broken images, we test for valid conrefs, we test that our little site drop-down menus are still working. Like, we test everything. We run our tests on the HTML output because it's super hard to kind of parse the Markdown. And that also frees us up in the future if we switch to ASCII doc or MediaWiki or whatever. Like, our tooling, our testing will still remain for the HTML content. If we're going to keep soliciting outside contributions from support or designers, we want to make sure that those changes are valid without burdening the docs team to like proofread everything that comes in. We see the status of a change on every single push to GitHub, and it helps keeps us sane. And more importantly, it keeps everything accurate for our readers. In order to run our tests, we use a tool called HTML Proofer. We use a library called Capybara to test like the navigation elements. It's kind of like Selenium. And all of these are hooked directly into the GitHub commit status API. And that same status API tooling is what developers in our company, and I'm sure companies the world over, use to run tests on their code. So for us, it's a matter of kind of mimicking the tools that engineers have been using and applying them to our documentation. But sometimes, even if you test the build locally and you get a 5-star rating from your reviewer, you want to be able to distribute the content you've written to a larger internal audience. In our case, we deploy our docs to a staging server. A staging server is just like a server somewhere internally with a private URL that's accessible only by employees. We deploy our changes to it and then we distribute the link internally. Typically we only do this for really big feature ships, and people in marketing and engineering get involved and kind of just make sure we're not completely fibbing. So in order to support that, we use a plugin called Jekyll, which basically limits the access of our site to just GitHub employees. And again, deployments are done using the GitHub Deployments API, which is used by teams, again, the world over to just deploy websites to wherever they live. Okay, so you've written your content, you've gotten a thumbs up on your pull request, build looks fine, now it's time to publish. So in other documentation teams I've been a part of, the publishing takes hours. There's like a dedicated team to the process. If you screw up the deployment, you basically screws up your entire evening. At GitHub, once again, we take a simple approach. Once your pull request is merged, the content is live. That's it. No one has to think about it. There's no additional information around it. There's no dedicated team. You click a button, the content goes live. And we do this using a feature called GitHub Pages. So GitHub Pages is completely free and it's available to every single Git repo. GitHub Pages is basically like a hosting platform for static sites. It does one thing and it does one thing well. It just hosts websites. It hosts all the HTML that comes out of Jekyll and it serves them to millions of users. Not only is our help documentation on GitHub Pages, but a bunch of GitHub's marketing sites are hosted there too. So there's kind of this incentive to keep dogfooding, basically, Pages. Every user gets a bunch of stuff for free. There's HTTPS support. All the assets are served by a CDN, so it's super fast for everybody. It's really, really cool stuff. And so the last step in the workflow is measure. And there's a quote I like to look upon fondly whenever it's time to review this step. So, those who cannot measure the past are condemned to repeat it. I am pretty sure this quote is 100% accurate. Here's the dirty secret about documentation, right? Sometimes there's too much of it, and sometimes it goes stale. Sometimes a feature that's been in the product for 5 years has 5 different pages of documentation explaining what it does. Is anyone actually getting value from your content? How would you know? You measure your site. Measure the number of page views, measure the number of clicks, measure how long people are on the page, measure how fast it takes the page to load, measure the support burden introduced by your docs, measure all of it, measure your website, right? This can be as simple as hooking up Google Analytics to parts of your site. GitHub is a data-driven company, so there are already tons of people who analyze the data as it comes in, but I guarantee that every project manager in the world knows how to do this. Because what will happen is your documentation site will grow and grow. And when it comes time to trim it down, you won't know which parts you can keep, which parts you can consolidate, and which parts you can throw away. So we consolidate a lot of documentation on GitHub. We take a look at the help site contains docs for error messages on Git. We document pages, we document gists, we document our desktop apps. In order to know which docs are important, we need to be able to turn all those confounding numbers into graphs to help us process them. And you can basically hypothesize the data all you want, but without graphing it, it's meaningless for a human to interpret. This is something I think documentation teams the world over. Hopefully I'm not speaking too arrogantly, but I think I've never been a part of a docs team that had insights into analytics like this. You basically end up doing a disservice to your users the more your site grows and the more you're not looking at it. You're all familiar with the sound of one hand clapping. What's the sound of well-written documentation that no one can find? The specific graph shows the volume of tickets that are coming in from specific documentation articles. You probably can't see the numbers too well. That seems to be a theme for this week's conference, but it basically tells you which articles are sending which readers into support. So as a result, our docs team, in conjunction with support, can then go back to engineers and product teams and point out which features are simply broken, right? Based on the support volume that's coming in through docs. Either the doc is bad or the feature is bad, and there's only so much that the docs can do. So the data helps us prove this. So that's basically it. This is how we use parts of GitHub to go through the 5-step workflow process. A lot of the ideas were kind of novel a few years ago, like testing your output or measuring the views. It took a lot of discovery and effort on the docs team to highlight the value in piggybacking on the rest of the engineering crew. The advantage is that even though our specific nitty-gritty looks like this, if we move to something that looks like this, or something that looks like this, the underlying tenant will just be being able to simply write, and that's what it's all about for us. So, thank you.